It was supposed to be a night of costumes and candy, but what the Haines family experienced that Halloween is the kind of nightmare no one can wake up from. In 1989, the Haines family moved into an old Victorian house in a small town in Ohio, just weeks before Halloween. Despite the house's age, it was surprisingly cheap. Mr. Haines, thrilled by the price, dismissed the whispers about why it was abandoned. He wanted a fresh start for his wife and their 2 children, Ben, who was 9, and Emily, who was 6. The neighbors told stories. Some claimed that the previous owners left without a trace. Others whispered that something evil lurked in the house. The Haines family laughed it off. After all, what better way to spend their first Halloween than in a spooky old house? The family decorated the house with pumpkins, skeletons, and cobwebs. On Halloween night, the excitement was palpable. Ben and Emily couldn't wait to trick-or-treat, and Mr. and Mrs. Haines had prepared candy for the neighborhood kids. But something strange happened that evening. Something that would stay with the family forever. It started with the first knock at the door. When Mr. Haines opened it, he found no one on the porch, just a small pumpkin with a crude, childlike face carved into it. Strange, but harmless. He placed the pumpkin on the windowsill and thought nothing of it. 10 minutes later, there was another knock. Emily ran to open the door, thinking it was more trick-or-treaters. But again, there was no one there. Instead, a second pumpkin sat at the porch, identical to the first, but this time with a jagged smile. Mr. Haines chuckled nervously, brushing it off as a prank. However, the knocks kept coming. Every 10 minutes, each time leaving behind another pumpkin, each more disturbing than the last. At around 9 p.m., as the trick-or-treaters dwindled, Mrs. Haines noticed something unsettling. The lights in the hallway flickered, and a cold breeze blew through the house, though all the windows were shut tight. Then came the knock again. This time it was slower, heavier, like someone dragging their hand across the wood. Ben, who was standing near the door, peeked through the peephole, and what he saw sent a chill down his spine. There was no pumpkin this time. Instead, a tall, shadowy figure stood at the edge of the porch, dressed in tattered, old-fashioned clothing, a wide-brimmed hat obscuring its face. It didn't move. It just stood there, as if waiting for an invitation inside. "Who is it?" Mrs. Haines asked, noticing Ben's pale expression. He couldn't answer. His voice caught in his throat. Mr. Haines swung the door open, expecting to scare off whoever was pulling the prank. But the porch was empty. The figure was gone. And sitting where it had stood was another pumpkin, this one with a hideous, twisted grin, and something that looked eerily like human teeth embedded in its mouth. The family was officially unsettled, but Mr. Haines still tried to downplay it, convincing himself that it was just an elaborate prank. They decided to call it a night and put the kids to bed. That's when things got worse. At midnight, Emily started screaming from her room. When her parents rushed in, they found her curled up in a corner, pointing to the closet. "He's in there," she whispered, trembling. Mr. Haines yanked the closet door open, but it was empty, except for one of the pumpkins, sitting right in the center of the closet floor. How did it get there? He had no idea. The pumpkins they'd brought in were downstairs by the front door. He was sure of it. Then, all the lights in the house went out. In complete darkness, the family huddled together, using a flashlight to navigate. The batteries, strangely enough, started to flicker as soon as Mr. Haines turned it on. They decided to gather in the living room and wait out the night. As they sat in silence, they heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate steps, slowly making their way down the hallway toward the living room. The sound grew louder and louder until it stopped just outside the room. Then came the knock again. 3 slow, deliberate taps on the living room door. Mr. Haines gripped a baseball bat he'd grabbed from the kids' room and swung the door open. But there was no one there. Only another pumpkin sitting on the floor, this one with a note carved into it. Welcome home. At this point, Mrs. Haines decided enough was enough. She called the police, but the line was filled with static. The electricity stayed off, and the house grew colder by the minute. The pumpkins from earlier were now gone, as if they had never existed. The family sat together on the couch, too scared to move or speak, waiting for daylight. But the house had other plans. At around 3 a.m., the knocking began again, this time from every door and window in the house. Bangs echoed from the walls, as if someone or something was trying to break in from every direction. The pumpkins reappeared, scattered across the floor, each one grinning wider and more sinister than the last. Then came the voice, low, raspy, and inhuman. It whispered the names of every family member, drawing closer and closer. Just as Mr. Haines was about to lose hope, the first rays of sunlight began to creep through the windows. As quickly as it began, the chaos stopped. The pumpkins vanished. The house grew warm again, and the lights flickered back on. The family didn't stay in the house another night. They packed their things and left as soon as the sun rose. To this day, they don't know what happened in that house, or who or what was knocking on their doors. Neighbors later told them that no one had ever stayed in the house for more than a month. Some believed it was cursed, while others thought the spirits of the previous owners still roamed its halls, desperate to claim anyone who dared enter. And every Halloween since, the new occupants of the house, whoever they are, report the same thing. A knock at the door, pumpkins appearing out of nowhere, and whispers calling their names in the dead of night. What would you do if you found yourself in the Haines family's shoes? Would you have stayed in the house, or would you have run the first chance you got? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more terrifying tales just like this one.